had to kill my mom. Sounds weird when I say it out loud, huh? I mean, what's the point? We'll just march to some new place and somebody else will die. It's never gonna stop. Eventually, it'll be our turn. I can't believe we've been here a day. A day. It's been a day, right?
Is Nick misunderstood as a character? Well, looking back at season 2, Nick at first didn't really seem to be all that much, but as I got to understand him a tad better, I realized that analyzing him would actually deem to be rather interesting. So let's get into why I think Nick is misunderstood as a character in season 2 of Telltales The Walking Dead. The first appearance of Nick in season 2 is when the cabin group get introduced to Clementine, but rather in a more dire situation since Clementine was bit by a dog earlier, and so the cabin group decide what would be the best course of action. First impressions of Nick is that we get to see that he's a bit hot-headed, stubborn, and doesn't like being bossed around by people. We get to really understand a bit more after the group discover that Clementine wasn't bit, and take her inside the house to treat her injury. As Luke and Clementine get to know each other at the table, Nick comes into the room and proceeds to ask Clementine to forgive him of his actions, saying that he went a bit aggro and he shouldn't have come across as that direct towards her.
I just want to say I'm sorry for being a dick out there. I got kind of aggro, and that was definitely not cool.
Nick's been known to go off every once in a while. Don't hold it against him.
Yeah, I guess we all have our moments.
Further on, we get informed that Nick lost his mother to a similar situation where the group tried to help a bitten victim, which the person eventually turned, thus infecting Nick's mother, who the group had to shoot her.
Well, I didn't mean to be so harsh. I just... we had a bad experience once.
We've all had bad experiences.
Nick lost his mom. We took care of someone who got bit.
It was my fault.
It was no one's fault. We thought we could control it, but we couldn't. And then she turned, and his mom was standing right there, and she got attacked. And there was nothing we could do about it.
Anyway, hopefully you understand.
So really, Clementine's arrival to the cabin group reminded Nick of his mother, and in this explaining why he was so adamant of why the group wasn't going to put Clementine down, as he and the rest of the group thought that she was bitten by a walker. And I'm sure Nick was persuaded by Pete, his uncle, which we find later on that they're both related, that he told Nick to apologize to Clementine since he was still in a bad headspace even after Clementine came inside the house.
Personal with you.
Why are you always giving me a hard time?
Because you're always giving everyone else a hard time.
I apologized already. She accepted.
Okay, well I didn't know that.
So it seems at first that the death of his mother is one of the main reasons as to why he's so aggressive, but really it's just the first out of many reasons as to why he's the way that he is. After Nick's apology towards Clementine and the conversation with Clementine and Luke, Pete comes into the room and suggests that the group should go out to gather fish for dinner for the next day. So the group does just that. Pete, Clementine, and Nick, with their supplies, head on to the river, and during the time of them walking to the river, Pete starts talking to Clementine about the time when Nick was her age, that him and Nick were both hunting for buck, and that in the end, Nick ultimately didn't have the courage to shoot. Thus, after hearing that, Nick gets frustrated with his uncle and both get into a little heated argument with each other, which the argument ends after Nick grabs Pete's rifle and goes ahead of both Pete and Clem to the river. But what Pete says afterwards, finishing his story of Nick and the buck, is interesting, saying that sometimes you have to play a role even if people hate you for it.
Sometimes you gotta play a role, even if it means people you love hate you for it.
He then tells Clementine that Nick's father wasn't around much at all, and that even if he was for a period of time, he was an asshole when he was present, leading Pete to be that father figure for Nick, trying to raise him right, being a little hard on him because of his father not being there for him.
Nick's father wasn't there much, and he was a piece of shit when he was. So it fell to me to keep him in line, raise him right. Meant I couldn't just be nice Uncle Pete.
Which just makes a lot of sense as to why Nick behaves the way that he does. Not having a father, especially for his son, can be very damaging for the kid, due to him not being able to learn key valuable things like respect, handling their emotions, what it means to be a leader, etc. Though a single parent is capable of teaching that, whether male or female, it's significantly harder and plus the sheer presence of that parental figure being there has a huge impact of the child's development. Nick then yells out to his uncle, witnessing a group murder by the riverside. The three decide to check the bodies to see if any of them are still alive to give them information as to what happened to them. As the group spread out to check further, Pete shoots and yells out after getting attacked by a walker, in which we then see that he ended up getting bit. Because of the shot Pete took, walkers end up attacking the three, and so Clementine, being in the middle of the riverside, can choose whether or not to go with Nick or Pete. For now, we'll go with if Clementine decided to go with Nick for context. Clementine goes with Nick, and later on we see that the two end up being trapped in a shed in the middle of the woods. And so the two decide to wait until the walkers stray away from the area for them to leave later on. During this time though, we see that Nick is very much in a deep depression as he portrays the sense of dread and despair in his expression, also questioning Clementine as to why she decided to go with him instead of his uncle. Afterwards, we do see a time skip as the day turns into night, telling us that it's been a while since the two have resided in the building. As it's nighttime, we see that Nick is throwing whiskey bottles as it seems as though he took an interest in them earlier in the day. He continuously throws the bottles towards the wall due to him being drunk and overall frustrated at what took place. As he settles down, Nick confesses to Clementine that he was the one that had to shoot his mom after the incident with her returning from the bite victim. We also find out that him and Luke had planned a sort of entrepreneurial arrangement together in hopes of making a breakthrough. Long story short, we find out that they both didn't exactly make a breakthrough, and thus Nick says that after 6 months, the two were flat broke, but despite that, he still had fun. In addition, he goes on to say that he doesn't know how Luke is able to move on so fast. For himself, he says he's not built like that, and wishes he were like Luke, further confessing to Clementine that it's over for both of them, and that everything they're doing won't matter since they'll all die in the end anyways.
Luke always used to push me. I never wanted to go into business with him. I remember when he sold me on it. His big plan. Some fucking plan. Case of beer in, he just said, "Nick, we're burning daylight." And that was that. After 6 months, we were flat broke. I didn't care. We were having fun. I wish I was like him. I wish I could just keep moving all the time. I'm just not built like that. Everyone I grew up with, it all happened to them. Now, it's gonna happen to us.
Up until this point in the story, what we learn is that Nick's mother is dead and that he was the one that shot her after she turned from the incident the group had a father before the outbreak that wasn't presently there for him, and when he was, his presence was with ill intent, and that his only family that he had left, his uncle, died right in front of him. And so now he doesn't know what to do with himself and is ultimately directionless and lacks purpose. With all this, it reminds me strongly of what happened to Kenny in season 1. Lost his whole family and didn't know what to do with himself, no drive, no purpose, and no meaning in his life anymore. And so Kenny also tried to drink his problems away, and like Nick, said, "Why keep going? They're screwed."
Wasted's not gonna help anyone.
Yeah? Well, what is? We are fucked! Molly said there's not a single boat left in Savannah. No way out. We got walkers all around us, that crazy fuck on the radio messing with us. Hell, if now ain't the time for a drink?
Obviously later on in the story, Kenny slowly starts finding some drive and meaning as the group find a boat, and even despite what happened to the boat, he found another drive to keep him going, which was helping Lee find Clementine. So Nick's situation is very similar to Kenny's in that regard. It's not just with Nick losing everything, but also the fact that now after losing Pete, he now has been put in a situation where he has to be his own man now and make his own decisions for himself without any guidance. Which we see later on, he displays the effects of that by acting even more of a loose cannon. A great example being not too long after the incident with Clem and Nick getting stuck in the cabin and Carver scouting out the home when the group were out, Nick ends up shooting Matthew, a guy on the bridge Clementine and Luke ran into while checking to see if the bridge is safe for the rest of the group to pass through. Nick saying that he did it to protect them when clearly he didn't have enough of a reason as to really shoot him in the first place. Another thing that I would like to add is that I firmly believe that Nick has unironically decided to look to Luke as not much as a father figure but seeking traits of a leader. You will notice that some of the things that Nick says towards Luke are actually quite the same things that he used to say to his Uncle Pete.
You know, Nick, I don't like this either. But sooner or later, you're gonna have to realize a simple truth.
What, that you're an asshole?
That nobody in this world is ever gonna give a goddamn whether you like something or not. You gotta grow up, son.
I don't know. Looked like he had a gun on you.
That asshole drew on me. He was about to shoot.
Oh, was he?
I'm telling you, man, he drew first.
Well, that's not what it looked like to me.
Fuck you, Luke. You've been on my case the whole week.
And why do you think that is, Nick?
Because you're an asshole?
He wasn't gonna do anything.
I know what I saw.
So I believe that Nick subconsciously saw Luke as someone to help guide him in a way, despite him not liking some of the things that he says, that more than likely would help him become a better man. Would you see that Nick had his moments where he was able to own up to his mistakes, like talking to Luke and Carlos after crossing the bridge, and confessing to Walter, a member of Kenny's group that we met at the ski lodge, that he killed Matthew. But what's truly unfortunate for Nick's character is that we don't really get to see any change of development for him, since after episode 2, he essentially is a background character until episode 4, where we see that he out of nowhere just dies, and turns into a walker as seen by Clementine and Jane as they were searching for Nick, Luke, and Sarah after the walker horde escaping house. So we really don't get to see any sort of change or anything from Nick becoming a man or seeing him grow into a leader per se, since before the development of his character even starts to happen, season 2 decided to kill him off. For me, in my head canon, likelihood is that Nick wanted to play step up in a way and try to save Sarah and Luke from getting caught by walkers, and so odds are he went out to distract or fight off walkers, which led him to be in the spot that he was when Clem and Jane found him. But I'm not sure. And the game doesn't give us any inclination or explanation of what really happened to him. Overall, with Nick's character, it's easy for everyone to hate on him and see him as someone who is incapable of making clear formed decisions that can benefit him or the group, which is fair considering he does a lot of things quite the opposite. But it's less him and more so his upbringing. Due to not having a present father in his life and that said father not being fun to beat around when he was present, growing up made him even more angry, aggressive, have a lack of respect, stubbornness, and more. And even though his uncle stepped up to the plate to care for Nick, it's not quite the same like having his actual father around. In addition to having to shoot his mother after the incident with her, that must have taken a turn on him mentally. Plus, looking at his long-term friend made him even feel lesser since he's not built like Luke to keep going despite horrible events happening. Ultimately, despite his faults, Nick did realize at times that maybe he was losing it, and that he was slowly trying to grow up in a way where he can handle his business as a young man and own up to his mistakes and grow from them. In the end, Nick just needed someone to help guide him in the right direction when it came to being a man, even though he had Pete, which he soon realized he took him for granted.